Alright, so my name is Armstrong. I did my MAT in elementary school, and I chose to focus on ways to foster academic responsibility, specifically focusing on homework in an elementary school classroom. So the question that I developed to help me research this was, how can I foster the development of strong academic responsibility, specifically returning homework on time in elementary students? So the classroom I worked in was a 4th grade classroom at Bishop Elementary School. There were 21 students, 1 student with an IEP, which means she receives special educational services, 1 student in the METCO program, 2 English language learners, and all but 4 of my students were on or above the expected reading level. So the reason I chose this project as my research project is that all year, both my mentor teacher and I really noticed that a lot of homework was not being done and returned on time. When we brought this up to the other 4th grade teachers in the school, they noticed a similar trend, and that was really out of the ordinary for this school. They told me that in the past, most classes would have maybe 1 or 2 students not bring in homework, but that was not the case this year at all. And it's also really important in this school because homework was used as a chance for students to review the concepts they had learned in class, and also a chance for students to practice the responsibility associated with being in school. So to research this, I did a couple of things. The main source of data I used was a checklist. I used this to track the assignments, when they were due and which students turned them in. Additionally, I used conversations with teachers, informal check-ins with my students, my inquiry community here at Brandeis, and my research journal to help me come up with my data. So I made my project in sort of 4 phases. Each phase lasted 2 to 3 weeks. And once I was done with one phase, I sort of put that strategy to the side and moved on to the next one. So first, I started collecting this information without telling students I had even started a project, or I was looking at their homework. I just wanted to see sort of the baseline of how often they brought in homework. After that, I told my students about my project and told them that every assignment that they turned in on time, they would earn a Class Dojo point. And Class Dojo is an online app that my mentor teacher used to sort of reward good things that my students were doing. So good behavior, hard work, things like that, they'd earn a point for. After that, I sort of switched gears and said, okay, now if you don't bring in your homework, there's going to be a consequence. We are going to make a copy of your homework, and you're going to have to put it on a clipboard and bring it out to recess, and it's going to have to be done before you can go play. And then finally, I told the whole class that if 100% of students who were there that day brought in their homework, they would earn a prize. Something like extra recess time or playing a game in school that they got to pick. Once I collected all this data from all these phases, I created a spreadsheet that let me look at both what each student did and each assignment's return rate. I made sure to take absences into account so they didn't affect the percentage for each student, because that wasn't what I was looking at. And I also calculated the overall percentage of homework that was returned under each phase and overall throughout the whole time frame. And then finally, I marked the assignments with less than 50% return rate, which there were several of, and so I wanted to really highlight those and make sure I knew what was happening. So right away, I noticed a couple things. I saw that over the whole span of this research project, 66% of homework was turned in on time. I also noticed that student percentages, how often each student brought in their homework, ranged from 21% to 90%. There's also only one day when all students brought their homework in, and that was not one of the days that I offered a prize. So as I got deeper, I really noticed a couple of things. First, I noticed that the type of assignment really mattered. So in my classroom, there were 2 main types of assignments. We had daily assignments that were, for example, assigned on Monday and due on Tuesday. These tended to be math sheets, but there were also sometimes reading, writing, or social studies work that had to be done. We also had weekly assignments that were assigned, say, on a Monday and due back the following Monday or Friday to Friday. These were extra math, which was an online program where students practiced their math facts, and they were expected to do it 5 times each week. They also had a reading log, where they needed to keep track of what they had read and for how long, and they were expected to total reading 2 hours each week. And as you can see from the graph, the daily assignments clearly had a higher return rate than the weekly ones. It's hard to keep track of long-term assignments, but even within the weekly assignments, the extra math was significantly lower. I think there's a couple of reasons for this. It's online, so they don't have that physical piece of paper to remind them to do it like they did with the reading logs. Also, the type of repetitive practice that it asks for, to log on 5 times a week and make sure you're doing that, that's hard for kids to keep track of. I also noticed that there was a wide variation by student. This graph here, there's a bar for each student in my class, and you can tell that it's kind of all over the place. So when I noticed that a student was frequently missing their homework, and there had been several days in a row they were missing their homework, I made sure to check in with them. And a lot of things they said in response was that they had been too busy to do their homework. I kind of understand that. A lot of my kids were really very busy. They were doing sometimes multiple sports in addition to things like Girl Scouts, extra foreign languages, piano lessons, you name it, they were doing it. However, my mentor teacher and I really all year emphasized that homework was a priority and really had to be priority number 1 when they got home from school. Some students also said that they didn't understand what they had been asked to do or they were struggling with it. This was hard because homework was supposed to be review every day, and so hopefully they would know how to do it and it was just extra practice. But sometimes I know it's hard, and so my mentor teacher and I, for the whole year, not even just during this research project, made ourselves available for help about half an hour before school every single day. And if students had come in early, I had not marked their homework as missing because they had sought help for it. A lot of students also told me they forgot either to do it at all or they had done it and they forgot to bring it back to school, which was what I was really trying to get at. So what did I do that helped? Perhaps ironically, the baseline before I even told them I was looking into this was the highest percentage returned. But I think there's a couple reasons for this. This project started in the winter, and so there was much more of a routine. This was before there were breaks in the routine from, MCAS and winter breaks and the winding down of the school year. Also in winter, there's fewer sports going on and kids aren't wanting to spend all their time playing outside with their friends, so I think that they were had a little bit more time. Other than that, the main thing I noticed was that having the logical, timely consequence of asking students to do it at recess was clearly the most effective. So you might be saying, homework at recess, that's crazy. That's when they need to run around and move their bodies and play. I agree. I think homework is really important. Recess is really important. But this is something, having students do homework that they missed at recess, that my mentor teacher's done in the past and is common in the school. We had them work during their morning recess, and they had a second recess at lunch that was never interfered with. I also made sure to put homework on clipboards and have students bring it outside, so at the very least they were getting some fresh air and a change of scenery. But most of the assignments only took about 10 to 15 minutes, and so they still had time to play within the 20-25 minutes of recess we gave them each morning. Also, my mentor teacher and I were available to help, so we could answer any questions and they could get it done quickly. So the main takeaways from this project that I learned were that having a consistent consequence, every day you do your homework or you're going to do it at recess, really helped my students start taking more responsibility for their work. I also think that this specific thing worked because it's a logical consequence. It makes sense for students that if I hadn't spent my time at home, which was unstructured, on my homework, I would have to spend unstructured time in school with it. So as with any research project, there's always questions left over at the end, and my questions that were left were, how would these results have been different if the research had been done at the beginning of the year instead of sort of in the winter near the end when it was wrapping up? Also, was homework really the best way for students to practice responsibility? A lot of the literature I read had mixed feelings about this, so that's a question that I was left wondering about. All right, that's it. Thank you. Are there any questions?
I have a question. You said toward the beginning of your presentation that this was kind of an anomaly, that they hadn't had this in the past. Do you have any ideas why this group of students suddenly decided homework didn't matter? Or?
So there were a couple of things. The other teachers in the school had also noticed that this group of kids, the whole 4th grade, was a lot younger. There were a ton of summer birthdays, and a lot of them were also oldest siblings. And so I think it was just a different group of kids that had their priorities more on sports maybe or other things, and then maybe also their parents didn't know what the expectations going forward in school were, so they weren't getting as much support or reminders.
I was wondering about that too, if there was like any kind of cultural bias or any reason where the parents weren't particularly involved with what their kids were doing.
Yeah, I mean, we tried to convey to parents that it was important for their kids to do their homework, that it was really an important part of school. I don't know how well that stuck. I didn't do research with the parents. But we made every effort also that if they weren't getting that support at home, please come in early any day and we will be your support. Right. So we tried to sort of make that balance. Rachel?
Just to piggyback off that point, is there a homework policy that is endorsed by the school, perhaps delivered from the principal to the teachers? Some schools co-create a homework policy and that becomes unilaterally accepted. Parents can sometimes even sign contracts saying, we will uphold the policy at home. Was there anything in place?
Yeah, so this school, I think parents were told to expect in 4th grade about 40 minutes of homework each night total, so including their extra math, their reading log, and any assignments. And we aim to be well below that. I think most things, aside from the reading, which my kids couldn't stop reading, couldn't pry the books out of their hands, but beyond that, it would really only have taken them usually about 15 minutes. So there was the expectation in school that they will have homework every weeknight, and it in 4th grade should total about 40 minutes. Yeah?
You said something about the different kinds of homework, but did you notice any difference in the rate of return based on whether it was just a review or the kind of homework given versus stuff that took more thought?
Yeah. I didn't look into that too carefully, but just like at first glance, I did keep track of what each assignment was. And so at first glance, it did seem that most of the reading and writing and social studies that had a slightly higher return rate than even the math sheets were mostly review. It was like, okay, we have a social studies quiz tomorrow on the Northeast states and capitals, so here's a map, please practice labeling the states and capitals of the Northeast. Those seem to be the highest return rates, that kind of like review prep for a test. So I think that would be another good thing to look into in the future, but I did sort of notice a trend with that.
You mentioned that you couldn't pry the books away from your kids, which is great news. If you were queen of the world, queen of education, would it be your preference maybe to get rid of this other category of homework and let them go for that reading?
I think that having that balance is really important. I love that they wanted to read all the time, and I definitely would encourage that. I don't think I would do the extra math just because not enough kids were doing it to really make it worthwhile. But I think having review in math and other content areas at home is as important as reading at home. So I think I would keep a balance. All right, thank you.
All right, so my name is Eric Young, and I'm going to be talking about class meetings in high school history classes. Okay? So I spent this last year teaching in Arlington High School in Arlington, Massachusetts. This is a suburban high school with about 1,200 kids. And though I did my research project with all 3 of the classes that I was teaching, I'm going to talk primarily, focus on the data from one of those classes. That class was it had 25 students. 15 of whom were white, 5 black, 3 Asian American, and 2 Hispanic. So, when I took responsibility in January, I gave the kids a survey, and I wanted to get to know them better as learners. So I asked a number of questions. One of which was, what should I know about you as a learner? How can I best help you succeed? And in hindsight, I guess I should have been unsurprised by the range of contradictory answers that I got. So looking at just like one particular thing, note-taking, let's see. I am a good visual learner, but not so good with notes. I like note-taking, and for the most part, I'm very organized. Hands-on activities work best for me. I daydream/sleep a lot when being lectured, and I learn the best through notes and videos. So this was a bit disconcerting because I realized that as much as I wanted to respond to the needs of my students, I was still going to be the ultimate arbiter of classroom decision making. With that in mind, I developed the research question: how does a class meeting in a secondary social studies context affect students' relationships with their work, with their peers, and with each other? So I came to class meeting. There are many structures for classroom decision making. I came to class meeting for a very particular reason. A lot of educators and education theorists subscribe to this like Deweyan notion that public schools should be a place where we are training an engaged democratic citizenry. And to a large extent, I believe that as well. I also did this because students were really receptive to the idea. It's important to note that these kinds of meetings are unusual in a high school setting. They're much more common for elementary schools, much less common in middle schools, and they're almost unheard of in high schools. Class meetings were possible because I had a really good working relationship with both of my cooperating teachers, and I also felt that I could justify the time because Massachusetts has an inadequate civics curriculum. I don't have much time to talk about the mechanics of these meetings, but I'll just say that I used a simplified version of Robert's Rules of Order, which is a parliamentary procedure. So students were elected officers at the start of the meeting. They passed motions. They could propose discussion items. One example of a motion that passed early on in the year for one of my classes was they wanted to use a different kind of digital platform. So we switched to Google Classroom instead of what we had been doing. So through this process, I kept a teacher reflection journal. I met regularly with my inquiry community. I conducted a pretty extensive review of the relevant literature, and I administered a series of surveys and videotaped every single class meeting from early March through early May. So some things that I noticed. I saw that students were really eager participants. They thought class meeting was fun. The meeting structured collaboration. Some previously disruptive students became really excellent officers, so it had implications for classroom management. Students learned each other's names fully. This may seem concerning that they didn't fully know each other's names come March, but it's different to know someone's name in the context of running a meeting, implementing parliamentary procedure as a 15-year-old than it is to just have a sense of who's in your class. So students were also mindful of each other's preferred learning styles. So I gave a survey on May 5th, which was my last day at Arlington High School, and I had students rate on a scale of 1 to 10 a number of statements or questions, with 1 being strong disagreement or negative sentiment, and a 10 being strong agreement or positive sentiment. So when I asked, I liked or disliked class meetings, the average response was an 8.77, so nearly a 9. They strongly agreed with that statement. Class meeting was a good use of class time. Also about a 9, strong agreement. Do you think the meetings had an overall positive or negative impact on classroom culture? Again, a 9. Did class meetings positively affect your relationship with your classmates? Not as strong or unified in their agreement, but again, they agreed with that statement in general. Did class meetings positively affect your relationship with Mr. Young? Yes, it did. Did class meetings positively affect your relationship with your classwork? It did. So, we see this in the qualitative, in the written responses to the surveys as well. So, when thinking about relationships with the work and with each other, I got a lot of responses like this. Class meeting helped us feel more connected to both our work and each other. I got to know more people's names and kind of how they thought. And it really emphasized the connection between students and teachers as a learning center for both parties. When thinking about the relationship with me, I got responses like this. It made him feel like such a positive influence because he really took our criticisms to heart and changed how things worked. Meetings helped Mr. Young to accommodate for the needs of each student better. And I normally saw teachers as people who just give rules and punish students, but with Mr. Young, it was really up to us. And then finally, thinking about agency, I really loved this one response. It felt like I had power in the way I learned. So I want to sit on that for a moment and just say that I think the primary takeaway is that students know when they are being respected, and they like taking responsibility for their own education. As Shanae mentioned a couple weeks ago, she said, this is all peaches and cream. Like, why is it so positive? Why were the responses so nice? And I think it's important to actually look at what's happening in this picture. So this is during a class meeting. You have a couple officers up here. They are students. They are leading. There's an agenda on the board. I'm in the corner. Students are raising their hands to signal agreement with whoever's speaking. So the fact that the meetings are student-led is really important. I think that the issues that we discussed were coming from the students themselves. I was a co-equal participant, okay? I am participating in discussion, adding my name to the speakers list, voting along with everyone else, and I'm also meaningfully sharing power here and instituting the changes that are approved through this process, okay? I think also it's important that the students are articulating their own choices and preferences and needs, but in consideration of others, and they became increasingly considerate and attentive to others' needs as the semester wore on. They even thought a lot about what was practicable for me, which was, I didn't really dream at the start of the semester that it would come to that. Finally, I think it's important that respect becomes a more meaningful imperative when students recognize that they have a shared responsibility for what's happening in the classroom when it comes to relationship, when it comes to policies, etc. So, I guess before I move on, I'll also just say that there are also a lot of really challenging things about class meetings. I think we all know that democracy can be really messy. It certainly helps that these students felt heard. Often, I think issues with democracy are tied to people not feeling heard. But I will say that as a teacher, sharing power with your students is destabilizing. That said, I was willing to try this out because student teaching is, I think, an inherently destabilizing position. So moving forward, I'm going to be teaching in Virginia this coming year, so I'm thinking a lot about how this process, how this structure might work in other contexts. Thank you very much. Any questions? Yes?
Did you retain veto power over the documents? And if so, did you ever exercise it?
That's a great question. I retained no veto power. I think the important, I didn't have much time to talk about what the parliamentary procedure looked like, but at the beginning, we talked about jurisdiction, right? What is the jurisdiction of class meeting? I am sharing my power with you all, but there are limits to my power as a teacher. We're not going to pass anything that violates school rules, town, state, federal laws. We're not going to, and like one of the expectations for me as a teacher is that there are high expectations for all of the students here. So if you think that there's too much homework or whatever, we can talk about homework policy, but part of that discussion means finding other ways to make sure that this is a rigorous learning environment. Yes?
So you mentioned that you had 3 different classes that you tried this in. You gave us data for one. Did
Yeah.
you see the same results across all of your classes? And if not, did it vary based on the age of the students, the level of the class?
That's a great question. So the other 2 classes I had were, one was another 10th grade class, the other was a 9th grade class. They all really wanted to have class meetings. The reason why I did not use data from those classes is that, I learned that especially the spring testing schedule can be incredibly disruptive. So for various reasons, I wasn't able to have meetings as regularly with those other classes as I was with this one. So this one was, I think before class meetings, was actually my most challenging class in terms of class management, generally some of the adversarial stances that some students had with me. I'm a new teacher coming in the middle of the year, asking a lot out of them. But yeah, that's why I used the data that I did, and it was mostly just about the frequency with which class meetings can be worked into the schedule. Yes?
So what were the big issues that were discussed, and did any bills make it through Parliament, anything substantive come of it, the changes?
Yeah, so I've got an appendix here. Some of the motions that were passed, I mentioned using Google Classroom as a digital platform. Students passed a motion requiring more frequent in-class projects with the chance to choose their own partner. They wanted some more shorter quizzes in addition to end of unit test assessments, and they also asked that I provide guiding questions to help structure the note-taking that they did for assigned reading. So those are some. There were many more than that. You may have been confused by my title page because there's a little ceramic model of a slice of bread, and yeah. So the reason why one of my classes actually passed a motion that designated this as our class mascot. And that may seem like a waste of time, but I think it's important to let students propose and pass silly motions because they are implementing Robert's Rules of Order. That is a complicated parliamentary procedure, and if it's going to be motivating for them to make this their class mascot, that's awesome. It also helped, I think, it changed their relationship with the concept overall. So yeah, those are some examples. Anything else? Okay. Well, thank you so much. So I think we have graduation next in Sherman. I will say, I think we'll definitely have some time though before that starts. Just a reminder that I think a lot of the other rooms would still be presenting. So if you could try to be quiet in the halls, so it's not to be disruptive, that would be awesome. Okay, thank you. We stuck to our timetable.
The next door, they just finished number 2. And I want to see yours. Okay, now you do it again. Go.
Would you like me to? I would.
It's a good one.
Yeah.
I know the write-up, but I didn't get the presentation. Right, we just wrapped up number 2 next time. Gotta make everyone who wasn't here.
Right, well, I would be interested to know, obviously,
So, because Eric
a lot of
product was a note to me that helped to class meetings in the
curious
MIT.
to know
And, but I didn't see what happened in this classroom.
would affect like receptivity to this kind of.
Was it good?
I doubt that it would be.
I was next door to and all of
You didn't have the nerve to ask me your unique question.
No, it wasn't. No, I actually told that to you.
So now I could like well, I told you about who's these videos? Oh, they're all videos. Oh, so
No, you're very much
I can watch it now. Yes, it's more funny.
Mine three classes honors. Oh, yeah. So the data you saw was.
So yeah, there's got to be at least one more going on in each.
They're wrapping up next door.
And still understanding.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. Do you have to be going to parents where to do this?
I do, yes.
You're going to Arlington?
Yeah.
You're going to Arlington?
I am.
I live in DC, so.
Okay.
Great.
I grew up in Arlington, so that's where I'll be. Well, I'll be living in Mount Pleasant, and I'll be teaching in Scottsdale.
So I was actually a teacher for the over together thing in Excel and
That was great. I'm just saying, I don't think I would have had the nerve to give up the iron fist.
You know,
It was scary.
it could be scary, but they responded well, so
No, I
that's great.
love it. Yeah, I love the way you presented it.
Our young
That was great. That did. To clarify, I'm only sharing the power I have. I don't have one. I'm changing state law here.
So,
I was, but now I live in Boston.
I do that here 3 years ago. Yeah, I lived in Maryland for 14 years. I taught.
What was the rationale for that mascot?
I think they just found it. Somebody in the class found it. Well, no, they found this little ceramic model of sliced bread, and they decided that was they were going to bring it to class meeting, and I said, okay.
And I'm
More grown up show and tell.
Yeah, there you go.
About that great experiment.
Thank you.
What would you call that? Well, we were talking about Greenbelt and how that was inspired by Ellen Roosevelt as a way to get children out of the urban centers, concrete, and into a greenbelt. Yes. And I had a friend who lived out there in one of those original homes. Yes, I was actually in the district, and I think only Boston could have pulled me away from DC. Yes.
So where are you in your like,
So I just finished I'm a PhD student, so I just finished my third year coursework, so I'm now in So I'm looking at campaign and community engagement in districts that serve significant populations of indigenous students. So I'm looking at how it's conceptualized, how it's promoted in practice within these communities, from the perspective of district and school leader, and teacher, but also from the perspective of parents and community members. Yeah, so I'll have two cases, one here in Massachusetts and another one in Ontario.
so where are you in the process?
So I am working on my proposal.
Nice.
Yeah, I will have to defend my proposal in the fall
And is that Ontario County? And how did you happen to choose the Canadian?
So part of my program is that legal assistantship. So we work with professional research. So the professor I work with, we have a research project with 10 district school boards in Ontario. And one of those boards has a majority of indigenous populations. So we get interviews in focus groups, and really my research interest comes out of that particular case and just views that they have of the communities and the communities.
So is this an Indian population? I'm using the new term now, Amur Indian. Yes, for Native Americans. But I think Canadians.
Granny,
First,
yeah.
yeah, they use First Nation.
First
yeah.
Nation, yes. Yes.
That's the term they use.
Okay. And are any living as far south as Ontario?
So, this particular district is located in a very northwestern section, like really at the border there, and a lot of their students are coming in from
Yes.
yeah. So this is like nowhere near Toronto. So to get to this actual district, you have to take 2 additional flights from Toronto.
Oh my.
Yeah. It's very remote.
Will you be covering?
So I will.
What a wonderful